Close your eyes, if you wish, and allow your body to rest a little deeper into the surface beneath you. The world beyond this moment can wait. The worries of the day, the hum of responsibilities, and the chatter of the mind may soften, like the tide slowly retreating from the shore. You are safe here, listening, and for the next while, you are invited to drift through the gentle currents of an old story. A story that is ancient, older than nations, older than the language you now hear. A story that comes from a time when myths were the way human beings explained themselves to the stars, the seas, and to one another. The tale of Icarus and Daedalus is, at its surface, a myth about flight, a father, an inventor, a son, and the daring of wings built from feathers and wax. Many people know the shortened version: a boy who flew too close to the sun, a warning ignored, and a fall into the sea. But when we linger with it, when we stretch the story open like parchment unrolled, we find not just a lesson of hubris, but a woven fabric of longing, of creativity, of imprisonment and release, of family and of sorrow. To hear the whole tale is to walk through corridors of invention, to step into a palace built like a maze, and to fly for a brief, impossible moment in the sky above the Aegean. This story has been told for over 2,000 years, passed from poet to poet, scribe to scribe, and whispered from parent to child at the close of day. Each generation added something new. Sometimes it was a warning against pride, sometimes a reflection on grief, and sometimes a simple marvel at human ingenuity. Tonight, you will hear it slowly, gently, as though it was spoken by firelight under the hush of night. The words are not meant to stir you into wakefulness, but to guide you gently into dreams. Before we begin, imagine yourself standing at the edge of the sea, the Mediterranean stretched wide before you. The air is warm, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and olive groves. Behind you lies the ancient world of Greece, a world where gods and mortals often mingled, where kings ruled from palaces adorned with bright frescoes, and where myths lived side by side with daily life. In such a place, the impossible seemed almost possible. In such a world, a man like Daedalus could imagine building wings. But to reach that moment, we must begin at the beginning. Who was Daedalus? Why was he in Crete? Why did he and his son long so desperately for escape? These questions take time to answer, and the answers are not straightforward, for myths meander like rivers, splitting into tributaries of detail and meaning. Tonight, we will let the story meander with us, unhurried, each part unfolding like the petals of a flower in slow bloom. As the story opens, I invite you to breathe slowly with it. Inhale as though you were drawing in the warm evening air of the Aegean coast. Exhale as though you were releasing the weight of the day. Let each word carry you further into stillness. The myth itself is like a labyrinth, sometimes leading forward, sometimes winding back, always carrying us toward the center, the heart of meaning. Just as Daedalus once designed a maze of stone, we will walk the maze of this story, calmly, gently, with no need to hurry. What you will hear is not a tale of loud battles or sharp swords. It is not the clash of heroes like Achilles or Odysseus. It is quieter, more intimate. It is about the relationship between father and son, about the consequences of choices made in secrecy, and about how fragile freedom can be. And, if you listen closely, it is also about us, about the human urge to rise beyond limits, to defy gravity, to stretch ourselves higher than we are meant to go. Myths endure because they do not belong only to the past. They speak to us in the present moment, too. When you listen to Daedalus shaping his inventions, you might hear echoes of our own restless creativity. When you hear Icarus rising in joy, wings catching the sunlight, you might feel a flicker of recognition, the way we too, in moments of exhilaration, forget caution. And when you hear the fall, the soft tragedy of the sea closing over a life, you may feel the weight of loss that every generation understands. Yet even here, in loss, the story does not abandon us. It becomes a lullaby, reminding us that sorrow itself can be softened when carried by story. So tonight, we begin not with wings, not yet with flight, but with the setting of the stage. With calm steps, we will walk through the ancient streets of Athens, through the courtyards of Crete, and into the shadowed prison where father and son dreamed of the sky. We will linger with the details, the way feathers gather in the hand, the way wax melts and hardens again, the sound of waves lapping at the base of a tower. The more slowly we move, the more the myth reveals. There is no need to rush. Time, for tonight, belongs to you and to the story. Let your mind rest in the thought that you are not the first to hear this tale while drifting into sleep. Imagine centuries of listeners before you, sailors curled in hammocks, scholars nodding at their desks, children resting under starlit skies, each one carried into slumber by the rhythm of these same images. You are part of a long line of dreamers, joined together by a story that has outlived empires. And so, with calm breath and open imagination, let us begin. The tale of Daedalus and Icarus awaits.
The story we are about to wander into cannot be separated from the world that shaped it. Ancient Greece, the cradle of so many myths, was not a single unified country, but a scattered collection of city-states, each with its own customs, its own rulers, and its own stories. Yet across those mountains, islands, and valleys, there was a shared language of imagination, a way of seeing the world where every river, every storm, every victory, and every sorrow could be explained through the presence of gods, heroes, and myths. Picture, if you will, a time before written history was easily spread across the world, when stories traveled not through books or glowing screens, but from voice to voice. Around the hearth, in market squares, or during long journeys at sea, people told tales to pass the hours, to inspire courage, or to explain the mysteries of nature. In those times, a thunderclap was not just sound and light, it was Zeus, king of the gods, hurling a bolt from the sky. A sudden change in the tide might be the whim of Poseidon, god of the sea. Even the gentle sway of the trees in the wind could be thought of as the breath of unseen spirits. The Greeks did not believe these stories were simply entertainment. Myths were part of life, woven into rituals, festivals, and lessons for children. They were guides for how to live, warnings about what to avoid, and celebrations of human ingenuity. For them, the boundary between the human and the divine was thin, easily crossed, sometimes fatally. A person might offend a god by pride, or be granted a gift that changed the course of history. These tales lived in temples, carved into marble, painted onto pottery, and whispered in the quiet hours of the night. Now, imagine the setting more closely. You are walking through the bustling streets of Athens in the 5th century before our era, the height of its glory. Marble columns rise into the sunlight. Artisans work carefully at their craft, potters turning their wheels, sculptors chiseling lifelike forms from stone. Philosophers speak in the open air, surrounded by students who listen with eager attention. In the port of Piraeus, ships creak as they prepare to set sail, carrying olive oil, wine, and knowledge to distant lands. In every corner of this vibrant world, there is a sense of movement, of questions being asked, of stories being told. And among these stories, myths stand apart. They are not limited to one city or one thinker. They belong to everyone. When night falls, and the marketplace grows quiet, people retreat indoors and light oil lamps. Shadows dance along the walls as someone begins a story. Perhaps it is the tale of Persephone and her descent into the underworld, explaining the seasons. Perhaps it is the labors of Heracles, a reminder of endurance and strength. Or perhaps it is the tragic tale of Icarus and Daedalus, speaking softly of ambition, invention, and the fragile line between freedom and downfall. What makes this myth special is how it holds both wonder and warning. The Greeks cherished balance. They admired brilliance, but they also feared what could happen when brilliance went too far. They valued courage, but they warned against recklessness. They honored the gods, but they knew the gods could be jealous, quick to punish pride. In this way, myths were like mirrors. They reflected back not only the world around the Greeks, but also their deepest hopes and anxieties. As you listen now, let your mind picture that world, not as a distant place of ruins and museums, but as a living, breathing culture. Hear the sound of sandals against stone streets, the low murmur of voices speaking in Greek, the clatter of tools from workshops. Smell the air rich with the scent of olives, figs, and the sea. And above it all, imagine a sky watched over by gods, each star a reminder that the cosmos was filled with presence and meaning. It is in this world that Daedalus was born, not just as a character in a story, but as a symbol of human skill. He represents the craftsman, the innovator, the restless mind always reaching for new ideas. To the Greeks, a man like Daedalus was both admirable and dangerous. He pushed the limits of what humans could do, building things that seemed almost alive, bending the natural world to his will. And yet, as myths often remind us, those who push limits must tread carefully, for every gift carries a shadow. As you drift deeper into relaxation, notice how gently the myth connects us to this ancient landscape. There is no need to hurry through the past. Think of it as walking slowly through a quiet museum after hours, the hallways lit softly, every artifact speaking if you listen long enough. Each vase painted with wings, each carving of a labyrinth, each fragment of old poetry is like a whisper from across the centuries. It reminds us that the people of long ago wondered about the same things we do now: how to live wisely, how to love deeply, and how to find freedom without losing ourselves. Tonight, the myth will answer some of those questions, and leave others for dreams to ponder. As the story unfolds, it will carry us from Athens to Crete, from invention to imprisonment, and finally to the open sky. But before those steps, it is enough to rest here in the thought of ancient Greece itself. A land of bright sunlight, shifting seas, and endless stories. So let the hum of that old world settle gently into your imagination. Allow the idea of myths as both comfort and caution to guide you. For just as the Greeks listened at night, soothed by the rhythm of words, you too can rest with this story. It is not just history, not just legend, it is a soft bridge between the waking mind and the realm of sleep. And in this stillness, with ancient Greece around us like a dream, we are ready to meet the master craftsman who will guide our tale, Daedalus.
In the midst of that ancient world, among the marble temples and busy workshops, there lived a man whose name would echo through story and song for centuries, Daedalus. To the people of Athens, he was not just an ordinary craftsman. He was a marvel, a master of invention, someone whose hands could shape the impossible into being. His reputation was such that when people spoke of skill, they often spoke of Daedalus. It is said that he could breathe life into stone, sculpting statues so lifelike that they seemed almost ready to move. His tools were more than tools, they were extensions of his own imagination. With them, he carved, built, and invented wonders no one else could dream of. Doors that opened of their own accord, statues with eyes so realistic they seemed to follow the onlooker, machines that moved as if alive. These were the kinds of marvels attributed to his craft. But Daedalus was more than a worker of stone and wood. He was a thinker, a dreamer, a man who looked at the world and asked not only what it was, but what it could become. His gift was a restless curiosity, the kind that never allowed him to be satisfied with what already existed. And though this brilliance set him apart, it also made him dangerous, for in the myths of Greece, great gifts always carried great consequences. Imagine him in his workshop in Athens. The air filled with the smell of wood shavings, of hot metal being shaped, of beeswax warmed in the sun. Light poured in from a small window, catching on half-finished statues, on gears and levers waiting to be assembled. Daedalus' hands moved with a calm precision, his mind already steps ahead, seeing the finished creation before the first cut was even made. Around him, apprentices whispered of his genius, of the way he seemed almost guided by the gods themselves. Yet Daedalus' story is not only one of brilliance. It is also one of flaws. For genius often walks hand in hand with pride, and pride, in the world of myth, was a dangerous path. To understand Daedalus fully, we must see him not only as the master craftsman, but as a man shaped by desire, jealousy, and fear. The myth tells us that Daedalus was of noble birth in Athens. He belonged to a family that valued skill and artistry. His sister, proud of her brother's abilities, entrusted her young son, a boy named Perdix, to Daedalus' care. Perdix was clever, quick, and eager to learn, and under his uncle's guidance he grew skilled in the arts of invention. Some say it was Perdix, not Daedalus, who first imagined tools like the saw, modeled after the teeth of a fish, or the compass, which could draw perfect circles. At first, Daedalus may have been proud of the boy. But as Perdix's talent grew, pride twisted into envy. For here was a young apprentice who, in his uncle's eyes, threatened to outshine the master himself. This is where we see the shadow in Daedalus' character, the fear of being surpassed, the unwillingness to share glory. In a moment of weakness, blinded by jealousy, Daedalus led the boy to the heights of the Acropolis. There, overlooking the city, he pushed him. Perdix fell, but the goddess Athena, protector of cleverness and craft, saw the injustice. She caught him in midair, transforming him into a bird, a partridge, that fluttered safely to the ground. Daedalus, however, was not spared. His crime was exposed, and Athens could no longer keep him. For all his brilliance, he was exiled from the city he called home. It was the beginning of a wandering life, a journey that would carry him to the island of Crete, into the service of a powerful king, and deeper into the winding paths of fate. As you listen, notice how even in his beginnings Daedalus embodies contradiction. He is both admired and feared, gifted and flawed, creator and destroyer. In many ways, he represents the human spirit itself, our urge to invent, to shape the world, to leave a mark. And yet he also shows the dangers that come when ambition is ruled by envy. The Greeks understood this balance well, and so they made Daedalus the center of one of their most haunting myths. If you let your mind drift, you might picture Daedalus not as a distant figure from legend, but as someone almost familiar. A craftsman bent over his workbench, his eyes alight with inspiration, his thoughts racing faster than his hands can move. You might even imagine him as a reminder of our own restless creativity, the way we, too, are always building, always seeking, always reaching for something just beyond our grasp. But the myth does not let us rest only in admiration. It reminds us that brilliance without humility can lead to exile, and that even the greatest minds carry shadows within them. For Daedalus, exile was both punishment and possibility. Stripped of his place in Athens, he was forced to seek fortune elsewhere. And it was this wandering, born from jealousy and loss, that would eventually bring him to Crete, to the palace of King Minos, and to the fate that would entwine his life with that of his son. So as you settle deeper into the rhythm of this tale, let Daedalus stand before you as a figure of paradox. A genius of hands and mind, yet marked by human weakness. A man whose creations would change the course of myths, yet whose choices would carry heavy consequences. His story begins in Athens, but it will carry him far across the sea, into the labyrinth of destiny itself. For now, it is enough to hold the image of Daedalus as the master craftsman, the one who could build statues that seemed alive, who could design mechanisms that defied imagination, and who, for all his brilliance, could not escape the pull of envy. This is the man at the heart of our story. And as we follow him into exile, the myth will unfold its wings, carrying us slowly, gently, toward the tale of invention, imprisonment, and flight. The story of Daedalus cannot be told without lingering for a time on the moment that changed the course of his life forever, the jealousy that turned his gift into a burden, and the act that drove him from Athens. It is a quiet reminder that even the most brilliant among us carry shadows, and that sometimes, it is not failure but envy that leads to our undoing. We have already met Pudix, the boy entrusted to Daedalus by his own sister. Young, curious, and quick to learn, Pudix absorbed every lesson, every trick of the craft, as though knowledge came as naturally to him as breath. Some versions of the story tell us that Daedalus was proud of his nephew at first, marveling at the way his mind seemed to leap ahead, solving puzzles with ease. But admiration turned into unease, and unease into envy. Pudix was clever in small, practical ways, the kind of cleverness that made daily life easier. One tale says he studied the jawbone of a fish and noticed the sharp teeth that lined it. From this observation, he invented the saw, shaping a strip of metal with notched edges that could slice through wood with far less effort than any blade before it. Another story says he took two pieces of iron, fastened them at a joint, and created the first pair of compasses, a tool that could draw perfect circles, something even the most skilled hand could never achieve freehand. For Daedalus, whose reputation rested on being the finest craftsman in Athens, these small inventions were more than tools. They were symbols of a young boy's rising genius. And each new success Pudix achieved was a reminder that Daedalus' glory was not eternal. In time, the master might be overshadowed by the apprentice. It is a very human fear, is it not? The fear of being surpassed, of becoming less important, of watching another rise while we fade into the background. Even in our own lives, though we are far removed from the myths, we might recognize the flicker of jealousy when someone younger or newer achieves what we once worked so hard for. But myths take these flickers and turn them into fire. And in Daedalus, that fire of envy grew until it consumed him. One day, Daedalus took Pudix to the heights of the Acropolis. The city stretched wide below them, temples gleaming in the sun, markets humming with life, the blue line of the sea meeting the horizon. It should have been a place of teaching, a moment of pride, uncle and nephew standing together in the heart of Athens. But in Daedalus' mind, another thought had taken root, a world without Pudix, a world where his own brilliance would never be threatened. And so, in a moment that would haunt him forever, Daedalus pushed the boy. Pudix tumbled from the heights, his small form falling toward the earth. But before his life could be dashed upon the stones below, the goddess Athena intervened. Perhaps she pitied the boy's youth, or perhaps she recognized the spark of invention in him and wished to preserve it. She transformed him into a bird, and suddenly, instead of a falling body, there was the flutter of wings. Pudix became the partridge, a bird that still to this day avoids flying high, choosing to stay close to the ground, as though remembering that terrible fall. The Athenians, however, saw the truth of what Daedalus had done. Genius was no excuse for murder born of envy. His crime could not be ignored. And so, Daedalus was condemned. He was stripped of his place in Athens, cast out from the city he had once adorned with his works. Exile was his punishment, no chains, no prison, but a wandering life, cut off from home, from honor, from belonging. For Daedalus, the punishment may have been heavier than stone. Athens was not just his birthplace, it was the heart of his reputation, the stage where his brilliance had shone. To be sent away was to lose not only home but identity. Every step he took away from the city must have been heavy, his mind echoing with the memory of Perdix's fall, and with the silence of those who once admired him but now turned away. Yet exile is a common thread in myths. Again and again, we find that the greatest journeys begin with loss. Heroes are driven from their homes, cast adrift, forced to wander, and in that wandering, they discover their destiny. So it was with Daedalus. His exile carried him across the sea, away from the marble of Athens and toward the sunlit island of Crete, where a powerful king named Minos awaited. And though Daedalus may not have known it then, the choices he made in Athens, the jealousy, the fall, the exile, were only the beginning. As you rest with this part of the story, notice how softly it warns us of the dangers of envy. The Greeks did not tell these tales to condemn us, but to remind us of what we all share. Even the most gifted among us may feel threatened. Even the most celebrated may stumble when pride clouds the heart. And yet, just as Pudix was transformed, and just as Daedalus' exile became the start of something new, the myths also remind us that endings are rarely the end. They are doors, opening into new paths, new trials, and new lessons. So let the image linger in your mind, the heights of the Acropolis, the boy tumbling, the flutter of wings, the partridge safe on the ground, and Daedalus, standing alone, his genius now shadowed by guilt. From that height, we descend gently into the next chapter of his journey, carried by the waves to Crete, where invention and fate will entwine once more. Exile carried Daedalus far from Athens, across the restless waters of the Aegean. Imagine him boarding a small vessel, its wooden hull creaking as it pushed away from the familiar shores. Behind him, the city of his birth faded into the distance, its gleaming temples, its crowded streets, its sunlit hills all slipping slowly out of sight. Before him stretched only the open sea, the rhythmic rise and fall of waves, and the uncertainty of what awaited him. For a man who had lost everything, there was no choice but to keep moving forward. The journey brought him southward, toward the island of Crete. To the Greeks, Crete was not just another island, it was a place of mystery and power. Its mountains were said to touch the sky. Its valleys were fertile, filled with olives, grapes, and grain. And at its heart stood a palace unlike any other, home to King Minos, ruler of a realm that commanded both fear and respect. It was a land where myth and history blurred, where ancient rituals and grand stories lived side by side. As Daedalus approached, imagine the sight that greeted him, the coastline of Crete rising out of the sea like a dream. The cliffs shone in the sunlight, white and golden against the deep blue of the waves. Beyond them stretched rolling hills and distant peaks, the tallest crowned with clouds. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of salt and thyme. And upon a wide plateau stood the great palace of Knossos, with its many levels, courtyards, and bright painted walls. The palace itself seemed almost alive, sprawling like a labyrinth across the hill. Rooms opened into more rooms. Corridors wound and branched. Stairs climbed and descended in unexpected ways. To walk its halls was to feel both wonder and confusion, as though one were already entering a puzzle. The walls were painted with vivid frescoes, leaping bulls, dancing figures, dolphins swimming through seas of blue. Every surface seemed touched by artistry. Yet beneath the beauty was something else, a sense of power, of secrets waiting to be uncovered. For Daedalus, Crete must have seemed both opportunity and burden. Here was a chance to serve a mighty king, to prove his skill once more, to create works that would be remembered long after his exile was forgotten. But here, too, was danger. For King Minos was not a man to cross lightly. His rule was stern, his pride immense, and those who served him walked a narrow path between favor and punishment. Still, Daedalus entered Minos' service. He became a valued craftsman in the palace, designing wonders that delighted the king. Some stories say he built machines that could move on their own. Others say he created lifelike statues, so convincing that visitors swore they breathed. His hands found new purpose, and once again his brilliance shone. Yet in the background, there lingered the memory of Athens, the fall of Perdix, the weight of guilt, the loss of home. Crete itself was a place of contrasts, a fitting stage for the next chapter of Daedalus' life. By day, the island basked in sunlight, its fields stretching green and gold. Fishermen cast their nets into abundant waters. Children played in the courtyards of whitewashed homes. The sea, calm and glittering, seemed endless in its promise of travel and trade. But by night, shadows gathered. Fires flickered in the hills where secret rituals were performed. Myths whispered of gods and monsters hidden just beyond sight. It was as though Crete held two faces, one of life and abundance, the other of mystery and fear. And it was in Crete, under the command of King Minos, that Daedalus would undertake one of his most famous creations, the labyrinth. A maze so intricate, so confounding, that no one who entered could ever find the way out again. But before that moment of invention, there was first the settling of Daedalus into this new world, the acceptance of exile, the forging of a new path under the watchful eyes of Minos. If you pause now and let the images settle in your mind, you might picture Daedalus standing on a balcony of the palace, the Cretan sun warming his face. Below him, courtyards filled with dancers and musicians celebrating a festival. Beyond them, the hills rolling down to the sea, the horizon endless. For a moment, perhaps, he felt peace. Perhaps he even believed that exile had led him to fortune. But as myths so often remind us, peace in such stories is never lasting. It is the calm before the deeper turn of fate. Crete would be the place where Daedalus' genius reached its height, but also the place where his freedom would be stripped away. For within the beauty of the island lived secrets dark enough to require a prison of stone, and Daedalus would be the one asked to build it. This is the way of myths. They carry us gently from beauty into shadow, from opportunity into trial. And so, having arrived in Crete, Daedalus' journey was only beginning. As you rest with this part of the tale, let your imagination drift to the island itself. Hear the sound of waves against the shore. Smell the air, sweet with blossoms and sharp with salt. See the palace of Knossos rising in bright colors, a wonder of its age. Let it stand in your mind not only as a place in a story, but as a dreamscape, a setting where history and myth embrace. For it is here, in Crete, that Daedalus will build the labyrinth, shape the course of heroes, and set in motion the events that will lead him and his son Icarus toward the sky.
In the service of King Minos, Daedalus found himself tasked with a creation unlike anything he had attempted before. It was not a statue, nor a tool, nor a simple mechanism. It was not meant to delight guests or honor the gods. Instead, it was to be a prison, an architectural wonder so intricate that it would confound the mind, a structure that would trap without chains, confuse without bars, and hold within it something that could not be allowed to walk free. This creation would come to be known as the labyrinth. The reason for such a prison was bound to another story, one whispered in the halls of Crete with both shame and fear, the tale of the Minotaur. Born of a curse upon Minos' family, the Minotaur was a creature half man and half bull, a living symbol of both power and monstrosity. Its very existence was a reminder of the god's wrath and of the fragile line between divine favor and divine punishment. Though Minos could not bear to destroy the creature, neither could he allow it to roam free. It needed to be hidden, contained, controlled. For that, he turned to Daedalus. Imagine Daedalus standing before the king, listening as Minos spoke of what was required. A place of such cunning design that once a man entered, he would never find his way out again. A structure without end, without center, a maze of corridors twisting upon themselves. It was not just a commission, it was a challenge, one that no ordinary craftsman could attempt. But Daedalus was no ordinary craftsman. Where others saw impossibility, he saw possibility. And so, the work began. Picture him walking across the wide plateau of Knossos, marking the earth with chalk and string, tracing the first outlines of a maze that would bewilder all who entered. Workers carried stone, hauled timber, shaped blocks beneath the hot Cretan sun. Daedalus guided them with patient hands, his mind always several steps ahead, envisioning pathways that looped back upon themselves, doors that opened into endless passages, walls so high they seemed to stretch toward the sky. The sound of chisels striking stone echoed across the island. Dust rose into the air, settling into the folds of tunics and the lines of weary faces. Yet the labor continued, day after day, season after season. Slowly, the labyrinth took form. Its corridors grew longer, its turns sharper, its design more bewildering. To walk within it was to feel the world tilt and shift, to lose all sense of direction. The sun might shine bright above, but inside, one could wander for hours without finding an exit. For Daedalus, this was both a triumph and a burden. His genius allowed him to create the impossible, a prison with no visible bars, a trap without locks. But he knew, too, that his work would be used to confine a living creature, one born of misfortune, condemned to darkness. Perhaps, in the quiet of night, he wondered whether his hands had served brilliance or cruelty. Yet such questions mattered little to Minos. The king was pleased, and in his satisfaction, Daedalus' place in Crete seemed secure. The labyrinth itself became more than stone and mortar. It became a symbol. To those who lived on Crete, it represented the power of their king, the ability to command even the greatest craftsman to bend his skill toward a single purpose. To those who heard of it across the sea, it became a legend, a place of fear and mystery, a challenge that few dared even to imagine. And in time, it would play a role in the tales of other heroes, drawing Theseus of Athens into its winding halls with only a thread of hope to guide him. But in these earlier days, when the labyrinth was still new, it was simply Daedalus' masterpiece. Walk with your mind through its passages now. Step softly into corridors that stretch onward, lined with smooth, cold stone. Feel the echo of your footsteps against the floor. Turn a corner, and find yourself facing yet another path, identical to the one you left behind. Ahead, the way splits again, left, right, forward, and no matter which choice you make, the walls rise high on either side, silent and unyielding. The air grows cool and still. The further you walk, the more the world outside fades, until you are certain you could wander forever without finding release. In this way, the labyrinth is not only a place but a metaphor. To the Greeks, it symbolized the complexities of life itself, the way choices lead us down twisting paths, the way we often lose our way, searching for meaning in a world that offers no clear map. To fall into the labyrinth was to fall into confusion, into the unknown, into the very heart of mystery. And Daedalus, the master craftsman, was the one who gave this symbol its shape in stone. Imagine him at the end of the work, standing at the entrance, surveying what he had created. Pride must have swelled within him, for it was a design like no other. Yet pride may also have been tempered by unease, for within this structure lived the Minotaur, a creature that could never be free, condemned to wander the very maze that imprisoned it. The labyrinth was finished. The commission complete. Minos had what he desired, a place to conceal his family's shame, a prison from which no prisoner could escape. And Daedalus had proven, once again, the reach of his genius. But in the weaving of this maze, he had also woven the threads of his own fate. For the labyrinth would not only hold the Minotaur, it would entangle Daedalus himself, drawing him into a web of secrecy, betrayal, and sorrow. As you rest now with this part of the tale, Let your imagination drift through the winding corridors. Feel their silence, their stillness, their endlessness. Picture the way the walls turn you back upon yourself, the way the paths seem to lead forward but always circle back again. The labyrinth is both a place and a dream, and once you have entered it, you carry it with you, just as Daedalus carried it in his mind. In Crete, his hands had built a marvel. But marvels are not always merciful. And soon, the labyrinth would become the stage for yet another story, one of love, betrayal, and escape.
The labyrinth was finished, its stone walls rising in endless turns and its passages stretching like threads of a spider's web. Within it, Daedalus had fulfilled King Minos' demand, crafting a place from which no one could ever escape unaided. And into this maze, the creature of legend was placed, the Minotaur, a being as pitiful as it was terrifying, born from the union of curse and fate. The Minotaur was unlike any other creature in Greek myth. Its body was that of a strong man, broad-shouldered and powerful, but its head bore the horns and fierce features of a bull. To the eyes of mortals, it must have seemed both monstrous and awe-inspiring, a living contradiction between man and beast. Yet beneath the terror of its appearance lay the sorrow of its origin. The Minotaur had not chosen its fate. It had been born into shame, the child of Pasiphae, wife of King Minos, and a sacred bull sent by Poseidon. The gods had woven their punishment upon Minos' house, and the Minotaur was the living proof. Minos could not kill the creature, for it was still his blood, his family, a reminder of divine power that he dared not defy. Yet neither could he allow it to live freely among his people, for its hunger was unnatural, its appetite for human flesh undeniable. To hide his shame and protect his realm, Minos ordered the Minotaur confined within the labyrinth. And there, in its endless stone corridors, the creature roamed, never to see the sunlit fields of Crete again. It is easy, from a distance, to see only the fearsome aspect of the Minotaur, to imagine it as a monster stalking its prey. But if you pause and step closer, the story shifts. Picture the Minotaur in the quiet hours of night, wandering alone through corridors that stretch endlessly, with no window, no door, no horizon. The walls echo with its footsteps, but no voice ever answers. It is a prisoner of its own existence, condemned not for its actions but for the manner of its birth. In this way, the Minotaur becomes a figure not only of horror but of deep loneliness. The labyrinth itself seemed almost alive, a place designed not just to hold but to disorient. Day and night meant little within its stone passages. Light was scarce, shadows thick. The creature could never know where it stood within the maze, whether near the entrance or deep within the hidden heart. For a beast that was half human, this confusion may have mirrored its own divided nature, never fully one thing, never fully another. The Minotaur was trapped not only in the labyrinth of stone but in the labyrinth of its very being. Yet the labyrinth was not empty of life. For the Minotaur's hunger required a grim bargain. Every 9 years, or by some tellings, every year, Athens was forced to send youths and maidens as tribute to Crete. These young men and women were led into the labyrinth, and none returned. To the Athenians, it was a punishment, a reminder of their defeat at Minos' hands. To Minos, it was a way to feed the creature and to keep it hidden. But to those who entered, it was a slow walk into darkness, into the unknown, into the jaws of the beast. Think of Daedalus, the craftsman who had built this maze. Though he had only followed the king's command, he could not have been blind to the suffering his work now contained. Somewhere deep within the palace, perhaps in the stillness of night, he might have asked himself whether his genius had served justice or cruelty. The Minotaur was imprisoned, yes, but so too were the victims sent into its domain. The labyrinth was a marvel, but it was also a tomb. In myth, the tragedy of the Minotaur is not only the fate of those who entered the maze but also the fate of the creature itself. Born from shame, cast aside by family, it was left with no place in the world. Neither fully human nor fully beast, it became the embodiment of being unwanted, feared by all, loved by none. Even its strength and ferocity could not free it from the prison that Daedalus had built. To wander the labyrinth in thought is to walk alongside the Minotaur. Imagine the creature moving through the darkness, the sound of its breathing echoing in narrow halls. The walls rise cold and blank, the turns endless. No sky above, no sun to mark the passing of time. Hunger gnaws, loneliness weighs. In this silence, the Minotaur becomes less a monster and more a symbol of suffering, trapped by fate, condemned to live a life without choice or change. This is why the myth endures. It is not merely a story of a beast slain by a hero, but a story of how the gods weave destinies that bind mortals and monsters alike. The Minotaur's tragedy lies not in its ferocity but in its isolation. And in the labyrinth, the sorrow of its existence was hidden, out of sight, until the day a new figure would arrive, a hero from Athens who would change the tale forever. But for now, let us linger in the stillness of the labyrinth. Let your mind walk its endless paths. Feel the air grow cool, heavy with silence. Hear the faint, distant sound of footsteps that may or may not be your own. Somewhere, deeper in the maze, the Minotaur waits, unseen but always present. And in that waiting, in that silence, rests the weight of its tragedy. The tale of the Minotaur is not merely one of terror but of reflection. It asks us to consider the boundaries between man and beast, between guilt and innocence, between punishment and cruelty. And it reminds us that often, the true monsters of myth are not those born strange, but those condemned by fate to live without love, without freedom, without light. The labyrinth had become a place of whispers across the Aegean, its very name enough to stir unease in distant lands. Word of it carried to Athens, where each year, or every 9th year, depending on the telling, tributes of young men and women were demanded as payment to Crete. They were chosen, sent across the sea, and led into the twisting maze from which none returned. Their fates were sealed the moment they stepped through its gates, for within awaited the Minotaur, prowling in endless hunger. Among those who heard of this terrible cycle was a prince of Athens, the young and bold Theseus. He was the son of King Zeus, though his heritage carried threads of both mortal and divine blood. Strong, daring, and restless, Theseus could not endure the thought of his people being fed to the beast year after year. He declared that he would end the tribute, not by refusing it, but by facing the Minotaur himself. He would enter the labyrinth and slay the creature, freeing Athens from its grief. His decision set the stage for one of the most famous encounters in Greek mythology. Yet it is important to note that Theseus did not succeed by strength alone. His victory depended upon the intervention of two figures, Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, and Daedalus, the craftsman whose mind had built the maze. When Theseus arrived in Crete as part of the tribute, he drew attention for his courage and his bearing. He carried himself not as a victim but as a hero, and his presence stirred something in Ariadne. The princess looked upon him and felt both admiration and love, moved by his determination and perhaps by his beauty. Though she was bound by loyalty to her father, she could not watch Theseus march towards certain death. Her heart compelled her to act. But how could she aid him? The labyrinth was designed to ensnare, to twist and confound. To enter it was to wander without hope of return. No weapon could carve a path through confusion itself. And so Ariadne sought the wisdom of the man who had created the maze, Daedalus. Here the role of the craftsman becomes clear. Daedalus knew the labyrinth as no one else did, for it was born of his mind. He understood its turns, its tricks, its endless circles. Perhaps he pitied Theseus, a brave youth facing certain death. Perhaps he pitied Ariadne, torn between duty and compassion. Or perhaps, in his heart, Daedalus regretted what his creation had become, a tomb for innocence, a stage for sorrow. Whatever his reason, he shared with Ariadne a secret, a simple solution wrapped in brilliance, the thread. It was not through brute force, nor through trickery, but through clarity that Theseus would find his way. Daedalus advised Ariadne to give Theseus a ball of thread. With it, he could mark his path as he ventured into the maze, unspooling the line behind him. By following the thread, he could retrace his steps and find his way out once the Minotaur was slain. It was a solution elegant in its simplicity, proof that the greatest obstacles are often overcome by the smallest tools, if guided by wisdom. Imagine the scene, Ariadne, under the cover of night, slipping to Theseus' side. In her hands she carries the ball of thread, her heart heavy yet hopeful. She whispers the secret to him, urging him to tie the thread at the entrance and let it guide him home. Her voice trembles with both love and fear, for in aiding him, she betrays her father. Yet love is a force stronger than loyalty, and she cannot let him walk into darkness alone. Theseus accepts the gift, his determination strengthened. He ties the thread at the threshold and ventures inward, each step taking him deeper into the twisting passages. The thread unwinds behind him, a fragile lifeline stretching through the cold stone halls. And in the deepest heart of the labyrinth, he finds the Minotaur waiting. That battle belongs to another part of the tale, but for now, what matters is the role Daedalus played. Without his advice, Ariadne could not have helped. Without Ariadne's courage, Theseus could not have triumphed. In this way, the story is not only about heroes and monsters but about the web of choices, compassion, and wisdom that allow myths to unfold. Yet Daedalus' role is tinged with irony. He had built the labyrinth to contain the Minotaur, to serve the will of Minos. Now his knowledge had been used to undermine it, to aid the creature's destruction and betray the king's command. Already, the seeds of conflict were planted, seeds that would one day entangle Daedalus in Minos' wrath. Pause here, and imagine the quiet intensity of this moment in the myth. The palace above sleeps, unaware of what stirs in the corridors below. Ariadne's heart races as she waits in the shadows, praying for Theseus' return. The thread stretches silently into the dark, a symbol of hope, of love, of cleverness triumphing over despair. And Daedalus, somewhere within the palace walls, waits as well, his mind burdened by the knowledge that his advice has changed the course of fate. This story reminds us that in myths, heroes rarely stand alone. Strength may slay the beast, but wisdom lights the path, and love opens the way. Without Ariadne and Daedalus, Theseus would have been just another name among the countless lost to the labyrinth. Instead, he would become a legend, a symbol of freedom, and the tale of the Minotaur would come to its close. But in the very act of helping, Daedalus had stepped across a boundary. He had betrayed his king, even if in silence. And for a man who had already known exile, the consequences of such betrayal would be heavy indeed. The night was still, the air heavy with anticipation, as Theseus stepped into the mouth of the labyrinth. Behind him, tied firmly at the entrance, was Ariadne's thread, the lifeline that would guide him home. In his hand, he carried his weapon, a simple sword, sharpened and gleaming faintly in the torchlight. The fire flickered, casting long, uncertain shadows along the stone walls, as though the very maze wished to swallow him whole. Each step carried him deeper into silence. The labyrinth breathed around him, its corridors stretching endlessly, its turns folding back upon themselves. To most who entered, confusion would set in within minutes, the sense of direction lost, the passageways indistinguishable from one another. But Theseus had no time for fear. He walked with purpose, letting the thread unspool softly behind him, each length of line a promise that he was not lost, that he would see the light of dawn again. The deeper he ventured, the colder the air became. The sounds of the world above, the distant surf of the sea, the voices of guards, the rustle of wind, fell away, until only the echo of his footsteps remained. Somewhere ahead, hidden by darkness and stone, the Minotaur waited. Theseus could almost feel its presence, like a storm on the horizon, unseen but undeniable. The path wound downward, spiraling into the belly of the maze. Shadows pressed closer. His torch burned lower. And then, at last, the silence broke, not with words, but with a sound deep and resonant, a growl that rumbled like thunder through the stone halls. It was the voice of the beast. The Minotaur emerged from the darkness with a force that shook the air. Towering, broad-shouldered, with horns curving upward like crescent moons, it was both man and bull, a creature of raw power. Its eyes glowed faintly in the torchlight, filled not with reason but with hunger. Its breath came in heavy bursts, steaming in the chill of the labyrinth. For a moment, Theseus stood still, gazing upon the monster that had haunted Athens for years. This was no ordinary enemy, no bandit or rival warrior. It was a creature born of divine punishment, raised in shadows, condemned to loneliness. To face it was to face the wrath of gods and the cruelty of fate. Yet Theseus did not falter. He raised his sword, steady and certain, and stepped forward. The battle that followed was not swift. The Minotaur charged with the strength of a bull, its horns lowered, its hooves pounding against the stone floor. Theseus leapt aside, the air rushing past as the creature thundered by. His blade flashed, striking against its hide, drawing blood but not slowing its fury. The walls of the labyrinth echoed with the clash of steel and the roar of the beast, a symphony of struggle carried through endless halls. Again the Minotaur charged, and again Theseus met it with skill and speed. The youth's strength lay not only in his muscles but in his resolve. He fought with the knowledge that Athens depended on him, that the lives of future generations rested upon his blade. Each strike, each dodge, was fueled by that purpose. The Minotaur, for all its brute power, had never faced such determination. Imagine the scene in the torchlight, the beast towering, swinging its massive arms, its horns slicing through the air, while Theseus moves with quickness, each motion precise, each breath measured. Sparks fly where blade meets horn. Shadows dance wildly against the stone. And beneath it all lies the steady line of the thread, waiting to guide Theseus home once the battle is done. At last, the moment came when strength and strategy aligned. The Minotaur lunged, lowering its head to gore him, but Theseus was ready. With a swift movement, he sidestepped, brought his sword down with all his might, and struck at the vulnerable point beneath its neck. The blade pierced deep, and the beast staggered, roaring in agony. The sound filled the labyrinth, a final cry that seemed to shake the very stones. The Minotaur collapsed, its body heavy against the floor. The echo of its fall carried through the corridors, fading into silence. The torchlight flickered across its still form, and for the first time, the labyrinth held no living terror within its walls. Theseus stood above it, his chest heaving, his sword stained, his resolve unbroken. The beast was slain. But in that moment of triumph, there is also tragedy. For though the Minotaur had brought suffering to many, it too had been a prisoner of fate, born into a curse it did not choose, condemned to darkness it could not escape. Its death was necessary for Athens, but it was also the end of a creature whose existence had been shaped by the cruelty of gods and men alike. Theseus may not have lingered on such thoughts, but the tale invites us to pause, to see both the hero's victory and the monster's sorrow. With the Minotaur dead, Theseus turned to the task of escape. He gathered the thread, retracing his steps with careful patience. The corridors still twisted and turned, but the path was marked, and the line guided him faithfully. Step by step, he returned to the entrance, the cool night air waiting just beyond. And there, in the shadows, Ariadne waited as well, her eyes wide with both fear and relief. The two embraced, and Theseus whispered the news. The Minotaur was no more, the tribute ended, Athens freed from its burden. For Ariadne, it was a victory shared, a triumph of love and courage over despair. For Daedalus, though unseen, it was the quiet proof of his wisdom, the knowledge that his guidance had turned the tide of fate. The slaying of the Minotaur became one of the most celebrated deeds of Theseus, a story carried in songs and stories across Greece. Yet the tale does not end here. For though the beast was gone and the labyrinth conquered, the choices made within Crete would ripple outward, shaping the fates of Theseus, Ariadne, and Daedalus alike. The labyrinth had fallen silent. The Minotaur was no more, slain by the courage and resolve of Theseus. For the Athenians, it meant freedom from tribute, freedom from fear. But for Ariadne, the victory was far more personal. She had risked everything, her loyalty to her father, her safety, even her place in the royal household, all for the sake of love. And now, standing at the entrance of the labyrinth, she felt that love returned in the embrace of Theseus, who emerged alive from the maze. In the glow of torchlight, the two of them shared whispered words of promise. Theseus thanked her for her bravery, for the gift of the thread that had guided him back to life. Ariadne, in turn, looked into his eyes and imagined a future far from Crete, a life where she would no longer be the daughter of Minos, bound by duty to a kingdom steeped in shadows. She saw herself as Theseus' companion, his queen, sailing across the seas to Athens and beyond. Their flight began under cover of night. Quietly, they stole away from the palace, leading the rescued Athenians who had come as tribute. The sea stretched wide before them, its surface silver beneath the moon. A ship waited at the shore, its sails ready to carry them far from Crete's shores. With hurried steps, they boarded, the waves lapping softly as though the sea itself was urging them onward. For Ariadne, each moment of that escape must have felt like a dream. The island of her birth, the father she had betrayed, the labyrinth that had haunted her people, all slipped into the distance as the ship moved forward. She stood at the prow, the wind in her hair, her heart full of hope. She had chosen love, and in love she believed she had found her destiny. But myths, like the sea, are rarely still for long. As the ship carried them across the waters, the bond between Ariadne and Theseus began to shift. In some tellings, Theseus loved her truly, at least for a time, bound by gratitude and admiration. In others, his heart was never fully hers, fixed instead upon the glory of his return to Athens and the duties that awaited him there. Whatever the reason, the tale turns inevitably toward betrayal. Their voyage brought them to the island of Naxos, a place of quiet beauty. The ship anchored along its shores, and Ariadne stepped upon the sand, the sun rising above the horizon in hues of gold and rose. She may have imagined it as the beginning of a new life, a place where she and Theseus could rest before continuing their journey home. But in the stillness of that island, fate moved differently. For there, on Naxos, Theseus abandoned her. The reasons given by storytellers vary. Some say he left her while she slept, her body curled upon the sand, her dreams still filled with hope. Others say he departed with a heavy heart, compelled by the will of the gods, for Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, had chosen Ariadne for himself. In that version, Theseus had no choice but to leave, surrendering her to divine claim. And still others paint him in harsher light, suggesting that he cast her aside willingly, his love spent, his promises broken. Whatever the truth, Ariadne awoke to find herself alone, the ship gone, the waves carrying Theseus further and further away. Imagine her there, standing on the shore, the realization dawning like a storm. The man for whom she had risked everything, the man she had saved, the man she had loved, was gone. Her heart, once filled with light, was now heavy with abandonment. The island of Naxos was beautiful, yes, with its hills and its wine-rich soil, but to Ariadne it was a prison of grief. She wandered its shores, her cries mingling with the wind, her tears falling into the sea. She had left behind her father and her kingdom, and now she had been left behind in turn. Few myths hold such a quiet, devastating image, a woman betrayed, standing alone where love had promised companionship. Yet Greek myths rarely leave sorrow unbalanced. On Naxos, Ariadne's fate was not to wither away in loneliness. For Dionysus, the god of revelry, of transformation, of life's ecstatic abandon, found her there. He lifted her from despair, made her his bride, and set a crown of stars upon her head. Some say he granted her immortality, placing her among the constellations as a symbol of eternal love. And so, though Theseus abandoned her, Ariadne was not forsaken by the universe itself. But to Theseus, the tale did not bring such gentleness. He sailed onward toward Athens, carrying the rescued tributes, his heart fixed upon his triumphant return. Yet even his victory was shadowed, for myths tell that in his haste and sorrow, he forgot to change the sails of his ship. He had promised his father, King Icarus, that if he survived, he would raise white sails as a sign of success. But in his distraction, he left the black sails raised. From the cliffs of Athens, Icarus saw the ship approach with its dark sails and believed his son dead. In despair, he threw himself into the sea, which ever after bore his name, the Aegean. Thus, Theseus returned victorious yet orphaned, his triumph marred by tragedy. And so, the story of Ariadne and Theseus is one of contrasts, of love and betrayal, of hope and loss, of divine redemption and human failure. Ariadne, though abandoned, found a god's embrace. Theseus, though victorious, returned home burdened by sorrow. Pause here, and let these images settle. Ariadne asleep on the sands of Naxos, awaking to emptiness. Theseus staring out to sea, perhaps haunted by the choice he had made. And above them, the gods weaving their patterns, turning love into loss, loss into transformation. The tale reminds us that in myth, victories are never pure, and endings are rarely simple. To save Athens, Theseus had to betray Ariadne. To find immortality, Ariadne had to be abandoned. And Daedalus, though absent in this part of the story, remained in Crete, waiting for the consequences of his own choices to unfold. The palace of Knossos was never truly quiet, but on the morning after Theseus' flight, a storm unlike any before swept through its halls. Word spread swiftly. The Athenians were gone, the Minotaur lay slain, and Ariadne herself had vanished with the foreign prince. Guards whispered, servants trembled, and the island's people braced themselves for the wrath of King Minos. Minos, when the truth reached him, was consumed with rage. His voice thundered in the great hall, echoing off the marble columns, his fury a force that seemed to shake the palace itself. The tribute from Athens, which had long been his weapon of humiliation, had ended in a single night. His daughter had betrayed him, his beast had been destroyed, and the labyrinth, the structure meant to contain his power, had been conquered. To a king whose pride was bound to his dominion, this was not simply a failure. It was an insult carved deep into his soul. But whom could he strike? Theseus was gone, sailing toward Athens. Ariadne had fled, her choice forever severing her from her father's forgiveness. The Minotaur, both monster and child of Minos' household, was dead. The fury that boiled within the king had no direct target, until his thoughts turned to the one man who had made the labyrinth possible. Daedalus. The genius inventor, the craftsman whose mind had shaped wonders beyond imagining. It was Daedalus who had built the labyrinth, a marvel of design that had confounded all who entered it. It was Daedalus who had given Crete a prison that could hold the monster. But if Theseus had found his way through its winding corridors, then surely it must have been Daedalus' doing as well. Who else could have revealed the secret? Who else could have betrayed the maze's mystery? Minos' suspicion hardened into certainty. It was Daedalus who had betrayed him, who had armed Theseus with the knowledge needed to survive. And in truth, Minos was not wrong, for Ariadne's gift of the thread had been born from Daedalus' wisdom. Though the inventor had not wielded the sword, though he had not loosed the Athenians from their chains, his quiet guidance had been the key to Theseus' triumph. Summoned before the throne, Daedalus stood with his son Icarus at his side. The boy, still young, looked upon the king with wide eyes, perhaps not yet able to grasp the full danger that loomed over them. Daedalus himself, though aged and weary, did not flinch. He had long lived in the service of kings, and he knew the precariousness of favor. Today, that favor had run dry. Minos' voice cut through the hall. You, Daedalus, whose cleverness has raised wonders beyond any man's imagination. You, who crafted the maze that was to confound even the greatest heroes. You have betrayed me. You have handed the key of the labyrinth to my enemies, and in doing so, you have robbed me of my power, my daughter, and my beast. For this treachery, there will be no mercy. Some might have begged, thrown themselves at the king's feet, pleaded their innocence. But Daedalus remained composed. Perhaps he knew that words would do nothing to soothe Minos' wrath. Perhaps he recognized that the king's fury had already chosen its course. And so he held his silence, his hand resting gently on the shoulder of Icarus, as though his only concern was to shield the boy from the storm that raged before them. Minos pronounced his sentence. Daedalus and Icarus would be imprisoned. Not in chains, nor in a dungeon beneath the earth, but in the very heights of Crete itself. The king commanded that they be confined within a tower, its windows high above the sea, its walls too sheer to scale, its exits too closely guarded to escape. If Daedalus had betrayed the labyrinth, then he would become a prisoner of his own genius, caged like a bird in a gilded but inescapable place. And so it was done. Father and son were led away, their freedom stripped, their future uncertain. The tower became their world, its walls a constant reminder of Minos' power, its narrow views of sky and sea a taunt of what lay forever beyond their reach. Within that prison, Daedalus must have felt the weight of irony. He, who had crafted wonders for others, now found himself trapped, unable to shape his own destiny. He, who had built the labyrinth to contain the Minotaur, was now caught in a labyrinth of circumstance, his genius turned against him. And yet, even in captivity, Daedalus' mind did not still. For Icarus, the tower was both a cage and a playground. The boy would wander its heights, gazing out upon the endless horizon, asking his father about the ships that passed, about the distant lands that lay beyond the waves. To a child, the sea was an open road, a place of adventure and possibility. To Daedalus, it was a reminder of what they could not reach, a barrier that mocked his imprisonment. But where despair might have silenced another, invention stirred within him. In the stillness of their confinement, Daedalus began to think not of walls and guards, but of the air itself. The sea was patrolled, the land locked tight by Minos' men. But the sky was free, untouched, unguarded. No man had claimed it, no king had set soldiers to watch it. If escape was to be found, it would be through the heavens. Here lies the beauty of myth. Even in the darkest of prisons, human imagination seeks flight. Daedalus, denied freedom by every path of stone and sea, turned his mind toward the one realm still beyond Minos' reach. From this seed of thought, the tale of Icarus would be born. Yet before we reach the wings and the flight, pause for a moment with Minos himself. Imagine him walking the halls of Knossos, his anger unsated, his pride wounded. Though he had imprisoned Daedalus, though he had cast his fury upon the man he believed had betrayed him, Minos remained haunted by loss. His daughter was gone, never to return. His Minotaur, the dark secret of his house, lay dead in the shadows of the labyrinth. And the Athenians, once subjects of his will, now sailed home as victors. The king had punished Daedalus, yes, but even kings cannot command fate to bend backward. The story had already moved beyond his grasp. In seeking vengeance, Minos ensured that Daedalus' genius would be turned not toward his service but toward escape, a choice that would lead to consequences neither man nor God could fully foresee. Thus, the stage is set, a king consumed by anger, an inventor imprisoned, a son caught between the two. In the Tower of Crete, beneath the watchful gaze of guards and the endless blue of the sky, Daedalus begins to dream of wings. The tower loomed high above the seas, its stone walls unyielding, its windows set like narrow eyes gazing out toward freedom that could never be reached. Day after day, Daedalus and Icarus lived in this suspended existence. The guards brought food, the waves crashed endlessly against the rocks below, and time itself seemed to coil upon itself, each day a mirror of the last. For many, such confinement would have dulled the spirit, eroded the will. But Daedalus was not an ordinary man. Within his mind, even walls became canvases, even silence became fuel for thought. He watched the gulls circle the cliffs, their wings spread wide as they dipped and soared upon the currents of the sea breeze. He studied the way they tilted their bodies, how they lifted without effort, how they seemed to belong to the sky as naturally as fish belong to water. While Icarus would point with youthful wonder, "Father, look how they ride the wind." Daedalus saw something more. He saw possibility. He saw escape. At first, the idea must have seemed wild, even impossible, to build a means of flight. Men were creatures of the earth, bound to stone and soil, their feet heavy, their lives constrained by natural limits. To soar like a bird was a dream, a longing told in stories and songs, but never achieved. Yet Daedalus, in the quiet of his prison, began to turn dream into design. With careful observation, he sketched in his mind what the birds already knew: the shape of feathers layered one upon another, the strength of hollow bones, the arc of wings catching the wind. If nature could teach him its secrets, then perhaps craft could follow. He would build wings, not from bone and sinew, but from the tools he had at hand: wood, feathers, wax. The task began slowly. Daedalus gathered what little he could. From the floor of the tower, from cracks in the walls, from gifts of the sea carried by the wind, he collected feathers, small ones dropped by gulls, larger ones plucked from nests, stray down that clung to the stones. Each piece, however fragile, was precious, a fragment of freedom. He bound them together with string, weaving them with reeds, shaping them into the pattern he had studied so intently. Wax became his binding, melted down and applied with steady hands. Perhaps it came from candles left in the tower, or perhaps Daedalus found some way to extract it from offerings sent by the guards. Whatever its source, the wax became the soul of his design, soft when warm, strong when cooled, pliable enough to hold feathers in place yet light enough not to weigh the structure down. Piece by piece, the wings took form, a mosaic of feather and wax, reed and thread. As he worked, Icarus watched with wide-eyed wonder. To the boy, it was magic, a father weaving flight from fragments, promising freedom from their cage. He would ask questions, eager to learn, his small hands helping to gather feathers, to hold material steady, to watch as the strange shapes grew larger day by day. Daedalus explained patiently, pointing to the birds outside the window, showing how each feather played its part. "See how they overlap, Icarus? Like tiles on a roof, each protects the other. Alone, a feather is nothing. Together, they are wings." The wings grew, and with them, hope. For the first time since their imprisonment, Daedalus felt possibility stirring. He tested the weight, adjusted the balance, bent the frames to curve as the gull's wings curved. He held them to the wind that whistled through the tower, watching how the air lifted them, how the feathers trembled with life. Slowly, steadily, the dream became reality. There is something deeply human in this moment, this act of turning despair into invention, of refusing to bow to confinement. Daedalus was a prisoner, but he was also a maker, and makers cannot help but create. Where others might have resigned themselves to fate, he built a path out of it. The wings were more than tools of escape. They were symbols of resilience, of imagination, of the belief that no prison could fully contain the human spirit. Yet even as he crafted, Daedalus knew the risks. Wax could melt, feathers could loosen, the sky itself could betray them with sudden storms. He worked with precision, strengthening every joint, layering the feathers with care. But still, the danger lingered. To fly was to defy the very order of the world. It was to step into the domain of the gods, to claim for mortals what had never before been theirs. And such defiance was never without peril. When at last the wings were complete, two pairs stood ready, one for the father, one for the son. Daedalus examined them carefully, testing each binding, pulling at the strings to be sure they would hold. He flexed them in the wind, watching the feathers shiver and settle, listening to the whisper of air as it flowed through the frame. For Icarus, the sight was breathtaking. His young heart leapt with excitement, his eyes shining with the promise of flight. To him, these were not tools alone, they were dreams made real, the chance to soar higher than the gulls, to touch the sky itself. He could hardly wait to strap them on, to leap from the tower and feel the air lift him. But Daedalus, older and wiser, tempered his hope with caution. He saw the fragility of the wax, the delicacy of the feathers, the truth that flight was not play but survival. He looked at Icarus, his beloved son, and felt the weight of responsibility. He knew that wings could carry them away from Minos' prison, but they could also carry them toward danger if pride or recklessness overruled care. And so, even as he marveled at what they had made, he began to plan the warnings he would soon give. The wings, fragile yet strong, waited by the window. Beyond the tower stretched the sea, endless and bright, the horizon unbroken. Above it all, the sky arched wide and free, untouched by Minos' power. For the first time in many long days, Daedalus felt hope rise in his chest, not mere survival, but freedom, carried on feathers, bound with wax, born from the marriage of observation and craft. The stage was set. The wings were ready. The sky awaited. Soon, Daedalus and Icarus would step from captivity into legend. The wings were finished. They lay against the stone walls of the tower like strange, sleeping creatures, vast, delicate shapes crafted from feathers, reed, and wax. In their stillness, they seemed almost impossible, as though they could not truly bear the weight of human dreams. Yet Daedalus knew they would work. He had tested every joint, checked every thread, strengthened every bond. The only thing left now was courage. On the morning chosen for their flight, the air was clear, the sea calm. The sky stretched open above them, wide and endless, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Daedalus lifted the wings, fastening the first pair to his own arms, adjusting the straps he had crafted from leather and sinew. The frame rested against his shoulders, light but firm, the feathers trembling faintly in the breeze that drifted through the window. Icarus watched, his face lit with wonder. To him, this was more than invention. It was magic. He could hardly contain his excitement, shifting from foot to foot as he waited for his turn. "Will they truly carry us, father?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Daedalus smiled, though the expression carried both hope and caution. "They will, my son. But remember, these wings are strong only if you are wise. They can carry us from this prison, yes, but they are fragile, and the sky is vast." As he fastened the second pair upon Icarus' shoulders, Daedalus grew solemn. He tightened each strap, checked the placement of every feather, his hands careful, almost reverent. He looked into the boy's eager eyes and knew that this was the moment to speak the warnings that weighed heavily upon him. "Listen closely, Icarus," he began, his voice firm but gentle, carrying the weight of a father's love. "This flight is our freedom, but it is also our trial. You must not fly too high, nor too low. If you soar too close to the sea, the waves will drench your feathers and drag you down. If you rise too near the sun, its heat will melt the wax, and the wings will fail. You must keep to the middle path, steady and true. Do not let pride lift you, nor fear pull you down. Trust the air, but respect it. Do you understand? Icarus nodded, though his eyes still glittered with excitement more than caution. He was young, eager, filled with dreams of the sky. To him, the warning seemed simple, almost unnecessary. After all, how could flight, this miracle, this gift, be anything but joy? Daedalus placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, steadying him. Promise me, Icarus. Promise you will follow the path I set. I promise, father, Icarus replied. With that, the time for words was done. The two of them approached the edge of the tower, the stone falling away beneath them into cliffs and sea. The air rushed upward, filled with the scent of salt, carrying the cries of gulls. The horizon stretched infinite and open, an invitation and a test. Daedalus stepped first. With a steady breath, he spread his wings wide, feeling the air catch beneath them, lifting him as he leapt from the tower. For an instant, there was weightlessness, the dizzying pull of gravity tugging at his body. And then, miracle, the wings carried him. The wind filled the feathers, the frame held, and his body rose upon the currents. He was flying. Not falling, not failing, but truly flying, as the birds did, as he had dreamed. The prison was behind him, the sky his new domain. Icarus followed, his heart pounding, his laughter rising as he leapt into the air. The wings caught him too, lifting him with a force that felt like magic in his veins. The sea lay far below, sparkling like a jewel, while above him the sky stretched clear and boundless. He shouted in delight, the sound carrying across the waves, startling the gulls who wheeled around him as if welcoming a new companion to their realm. Together, father and son soared above the cliffs of Crete. The tower that had confined them grew smaller and smaller, until it was no more than a shadow upon the shore. The guards, if they saw, could do nothing but gape in astonishment, powerless to stop what no man had ever achieved before. Minos, in his palace, could not touch them now. The sky belonged to Daedalus and Icarus. For Daedalus, the flight was filled with both triumph and caution. He kept his path steady, testing the air, adjusting his wings with practiced care. Each movement of his arms guided the feathers, each tilt of his body steered his course. He glanced often at Icarus, calling out reminders to keep to the middle, to hold steady, to follow his lead. For Icarus, the flight was pure exhilaration. He felt the wind rush against his face, the lift of the air beneath his wings, the dizzying freedom of being unbound. Every beat of his wings carried him higher, every gust carried him further. He laughed aloud, drunk on joy, his father's warnings dim against the roar of discovery in his ears. From below, the sea stretched endlessly, its waves crashing against unseen shores. From above, the sun glowed brighter, a golden crown calling to him. To Icarus, both seemed irresistible. But for now, in these first moments, he kept near his father, the thrill of freedom filling him like fire, the world new and radiant beneath their wings. The sky, once only a dream, had become their reality. They were no longer prisoners, no longer bound by Minos' anger or by the walls of stone. They were wanderers of the air, voyagers in a realm untouched by kings. For Daedalus, it was the fulfillment of his craft. For Icarus, it was the beginning of wonder. And so they flew on, father and son, carried by feathers and wax, carried by hope, carried by the courage to leap into the impossible. Behind them lay Crete and its chains. Ahead lay the vast unknown, waiting to test not only their wings but their hearts. The sky stretched wide and endless, and for a time it seemed as though nothing could break the spell of flight. Daedalus and Icarus drifted over the sea, their wings catching the light, their bodies moving with the winds as though they had always belonged to the heavens. Below them, the water glimmered, a shifting mirror of blue and silver. Above, the sun burned brightly, its rays streaming down in golden shafts. For Daedalus, each beat of his wings was measured, cautious. He tested the currents, adjusted his angle, and kept his path steady. He glanced often at his son, calling warnings over the rush of the wind. Stay near, Icarus. Keep to the middle path, not too high, not too low. His voice carried urgency, the weight of experience and fear. For he knew that though they soared in triumph, the danger was as close as the very air that held them. But for Icarus, the warnings were lost amid the intoxication of flight. He had never known such freedom, such wonder. Each movement lifted him higher, each gust filled him with joy. He looked down at the sea and laughed at how small and harmless it seemed. He looked up at the sky and felt a thrill that no words could capture. This was no longer escape, it was ecstasy. He was no longer a boy bound by stone walls. He was a creature of the sky, a rival to the birds themselves, perhaps even to the gods. The gulls wheeled beside him, calling out as if in greeting, but even they did not climb as he climbed. Higher he rose, his arms straining, his wings beating with youthful strength. The air grew thinner, cooler, sharper, but still he rose, chasing the warmth of the sun. Below, Daedalus saw with dread what his son was doing. He shouted, his voice desperate, carried thin by the wind, "Icarus! Come down! Not so high, my son! Remember the wax, remember the warnings." But the boy was far above hearing, lost in his own delight. His laughter rang through the air, a bright, fearless sound, as he climbed ever closer to the blazing orb. The sun, radiant and merciless, shone down upon him. Its heat touched the wings, softening the wax that bound the feathers together. At first, only a feather or two slipped free, fluttering downward like snow. Icarus hardly noticed. He only marveled at how light he felt, how close the sun seemed, how infinite the sky had become. Then more feathers loosened, their bindings melting, the structure weakening. Icarus looked to his wings and saw the cracks forming, the feathers drifting away, the frame trembling. His laughter faltered. The joy turned to fear as he realized the truth. He tried to steady himself, to beat his wings more carefully, but the wax softened further, dripping into the air, falling into the sea far below. Daedalus saw it all from beneath. His heart ached as he called out again, his voice breaking with grief. "Icarus! Come down! Save yourself!" But already it was too late. The wings came apart. Feathers scattered in the wind, spinning like white petals torn from a flower. The boy's arms, once lifted by flight, were now bare and useless. The sky no longer held him. Gravity, patient and unyielding, claimed him once more. Icarus fell. The sea rushed upward, waves glimmering like glass, but to Icarus they must have seemed like an abyss, endless and cold. His cry, if he gave one, was lost to the air, carried away by the same wind that once bore his joy. The boy who had soared so high, who had tasted the ecstasy of flight, now plummeted helplessly. And then, impact. The waves swallowed him, closed over him, and carried him down into their depths. Daedalus hovered above, watching in despair. He circled the place where his son had fallen, his wings still whole, his body trembling with grief. He cried out to the sea, to the gods, to fate itself, but no answer came. Only the ripples of the waves marked the spot where Icarus had vanished, the water calm again as though it had always belonged to itself. The sea where the boy fell would forever bear his name, the Icarian Sea, a reminder of that tragic flight. Some tales say the island of Icaria took its name as well, marking the place where his body was carried ashore. Whatever the details, the world remembered the fall, and in that memory, the boy lived on. For Daedalus, the loss was unbearable. He descended carefully, wings trembling, and searched the waters, calling again and again for Icarus. He may have recovered the boy's body, or he may have been denied even that. What is certain is that grief followed him wherever he flew next. His invention had given them freedom, but it had also brought him the deepest sorrow of his life. Pause for a moment here, and picture it in your mind, the feathers drifting slowly through the air, some caught by the wind, others settling upon the sea. A father circling helplessly above the waves, torn between survival and despair. A son who had reached too high, who had touched wonder for a fleeting moment, only to be undone by it. The tale of Icarus has been told for centuries, not just as a story of flight but as a lesson, a reminder of the dangers of hubris, of the importance of heeding wisdom, of the fragile balance between aspiration and caution. Yet there is also beauty in it, for Icarus truly did fly. He soared where no mortal had soared before. His fall was tragic, but his flight was sublime, and perhaps it is that contradiction that has kept his story alive across time. Daedalus, heavy with sorrow, turned his wings once more to the air. He could not remain above the place of loss forever. With slow, careful strokes, he flew onward, carrying not only the weight of his body but the weight of grief. The father lived, but the son's laughter lingered only in memory, carried faintly on the wind. And so, the flight of Daedalus and Icarus ended not in triumph, but in tragedy. A triumph of invention, yes, but also a tale of warning. It is a story of freedom and loss, of dreams and their cost, of the endless tension between human daring and the limits of fate. The sea grew quiet again after Icarus' fall, as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The waves continued their steady rhythm, the gulls circled above, the sun burned overhead with the same merciless light. Only Daedalus felt the rupture, the wound torn into the world. To him, the sea was no longer just the sea, it was the grave of his son. Hovering above the water, Daedalus wept. His tears blurred the horizon, fell into the waves, mingled with the salt of the sea. He called Icarus' name again and again, but only the echo of his own grief returned to him. The feathers floated still, scattered across the surface, bright against the dark water. Each one was a reminder, a fragment of the wings that had carried Icarus to both glory and ruin. Some say Daedalus descended, lowering himself carefully toward the waves, and gathered the body of his son. He cradled him in his arms, wings still strapped to his back, and wept over him with a sorrow no invention could mend. Others tell that the sea claimed Icarus entirely, leaving only the memory and the feathers for his father to mourn. Either way, the pain was the same, a father who had given his son the sky, only to lose him to it. The island nearby would later be named Icaria, a place forever marked by the boy's fall. The surrounding waters became known as the Icarian Sea. Geography itself carried the imprint of the tragedy, as if the earth and sea conspired to preserve the story, to etch grief into the very map of the world. Daedalus' own survival was bitter. He had achieved the impossible, he had outwitted Minos, escaped the prison, and proven the power of his craft. Yet what triumph could remain when it came at such cost? His invention had been a marvel, but it had also been a weapon of fate, a fragile bridge that carried both freedom and destruction. To live with that knowledge was a burden almost heavier than chains. As he flew on, leaving behind the feathers and the sea, Daedalus was silent. His body moved with mechanical precision, his arms guiding the wings in steady beats. He no longer felt the joy of flight, no longer marveled at the sky. The invention was no longer miracle but curse, for it had betrayed him by giving his son the power to rise too high. Yet, he knew the fault was not in the wings alone, it was in the untempered eagerness of youth, the pride of soaring, the failure of warnings to bind as strongly as wax. He may have asked himself again and again, could I have done more? Should I have held him closer, bound him with stricter warnings, perhaps even clipped the wings? Such thoughts haunted him, though they had no answer. For fate had already taken its course. In the stillness of the air, Daedalus remembered Icarus' laughter, the boy's bright eyes, the wonder in his voice when he first spread the wings. That laughter lingered louder in memory than the cries of despair. And perhaps that is what made the grief so piercing, to know that joy had existed, if only for a fleeting moment, before it dissolved into silence. The Greeks who told this story often imagined Daedalus landing eventually upon the shores of Sicily, where he found refuge with King Cocalus. Yet even in safety, his soul could not rest. Wherever he went, the ghost of Icarus followed him. He was a craftsman, a genius, a creator of wonders, yet all the skill in the world could not restore what was lost. No machine, no statue, no design could bring back the boy who had once looked at the sky with shining eyes. In this way, Daedalus became a figure of dual legacy. To some, he was the greatest of inventors, the man who defied kings and gods by crafting miracles. To others, he was a father marked by tragedy, a warning of how brilliance and ambition can carry both glory and grief. His story, like that of his son, carried a balance, invention and loss, triumph and sorrow, genius and regret. Let us linger on the image for a moment, a solitary figure flying across the open sea, wings spread but heavy with grief. The sky no longer feels like freedom but like exile. Each gust of wind is a reminder of what he has lost. Each feather that trembles on his own wings recalls those scattered upon the waves. He is alive, but in his survival there is no victory, only endurance. And yet, even in his sorrow, Daedalus carried forward. That, too, is part of the myth. He did not surrender to the sea, did not let despair drag him down. He flew on, though his heart was broken. Perhaps there is a quiet strength in that persistence, the will to endure even when joy has been stripped away. It is not triumph in the usual sense, but it is survival, and sometimes survival itself is the only victory left to us. For those who hear this story before sleep, there is something universal in Daedalus' grief. We know what it is to lose, to regret, to wonder what might have been if only different choices were made. Yet the story also reminds us that love is at the heart of it all. Daedalus' warnings, his sorrow, his survival, all of it speaks of love for his son. And in that love, Icarus is remembered, not only as a boy who fell, but as a boy who lived, who dreamed, who touched the sky. As the waves closed once more and the sky stretched onward, Daedalus continued his flight. He carried with him not only his invention but also his burden, the unshakable weight of memory. The world would remember the boy who flew too high, but the father would always remember the boy who was his son. And so, the myth lingers, suspended between grief and wonder. A father in sorrow, a son in the sea, and the sky eternal above them both. The story of Daedalus and Icarus did not end with the waves swallowing the boy, nor with Daedalus' grief. Like many tales woven in the tapestry of Greek mythology, it endured because of the lessons it carried, lessons that echoed in the hearts of those who heard it. The myth was not just a story of flight and fall, it was a parable, a warning, a meditation on human nature and its restless desire to reach beyond its limits. For the Greeks, who believed that the gods watched over human affairs with keen interest, Icarus' fall was a clear example of hubris, that fatal arrogance which so often drew divine punishment. To soar too high, to forget the warnings of wisdom, to think oneself beyond the natural order, these were dangerous temptations. And Icarus, young and eager, fell victim to them. His fall was not only from the sky but from balance, from the harmony between ambition and restraint. The image of Daedalus urging moderation, not too high, not too low, is one that resonated deeply with Greek thought. It echoed the Delphic maxim Medon agon, nothing in excess. The Greeks valued balance, the middle way, the ability to walk between extremes. Icarus' refusal, or inability, to heed that path became a warning to all who heard the story. To fly too close to the sea was cowardice, to fly too near the sun was recklessness. Only the middle path, the path of measured wisdom, could lead to survival. And yet, the myth was not only a stern lecture. It was also a reflection on the allure of dreams. Who could blame Icarus for wanting to soar higher? Who among us, with wings on our shoulders and the vast sky before us, would not feel the pull of the sun? There is tragedy in his fall, yes, but there is also a bittersweet admiration. He reached for more, he dared to touch the edge of the impossible, and for a moment, however brief, he succeeded. In this tension lies the true legacy of the tale. For some, it is a warning: respect limits, honor wisdom, stay grounded in balance. For others, it is a story of inspiration, even if it ends in sorrow. Better to have flown and fallen than never to have flown at all. The myth holds both readings at once, and perhaps that is why it has endured across centuries. When ancient poets and philosophers retold the myth, they often emphasized the lesson of moderation. The story became a teaching tool for the young, a way to remind them of the dangers of pride and disobedience. Teachers would recite the tale as a moral parable: listen to your elders, follow guidance, do not let reckless ambition blind you. In this way, the story became a cultural touchstone, a means of transmitting wisdom from one generation to the next. But in quieter ways, the myth also spoke of grief and love. It showed a father's attempt to guide his son, a father's pain at being ignored, and a father's loss when that guidance proved insufficient. In this, the myth became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a meditation on family, on the fragility of bonds, on the sorrow that follows when love cannot prevent fate. The Greeks, who honored family ties deeply, would have felt the ache of Daedalus' grief as strongly as the moral of moderation. Over time, as the myth traveled beyond Greece, its meanings multiplied. Roman poets such as Ovid retold it with poetic sorrow, lingering on the beauty of Icarus' flight and the sadness of his fall. Later storytellers, artists, and philosophers found in it new symbols: the dreamer undone by ambition, the artist consumed by inspiration, the youth destroyed by impatience. Each age reshaped the story to reflect its own fears and hopes, but the core remained the same: the delicate balance between daring and wisdom. The very landscape carried the memory. The Icarian Sea, the island of Icaria, these were not just names, but reminders etched into geography itself. To sail those waters was to be reminded of Icarus' fall, to feel the shadow of his story in the waves. In this way, myth and world intertwined, each giving meaning to the other. The legacy of the myth also lies in its enduring imagery. The vision of feathers falling from the sky, of a boy tumbling into the sea, of a father crying out in despair, these are images that linger in the mind long after the tale is told. They are simple, vivid, unforgettable. And perhaps that is why the story works so well as a bedtime tale. It lulls the listener into a world both calm and vast, filled with sky and sea, while carrying a weight of meaning beneath the gentle flow of words. It is worth reflecting, too, on how the myth mirrors our own struggles. Even today, we wrestle with the desire to push boundaries, to achieve greatness, to chase the sun of our ambitions. We are warned to be careful, to be moderate, to keep balance. And yet, often, we cannot resist the call to rise higher. In this way, Icarus remains ever human, ever relatable. His wings may be made of wax and feathers, but his heart is the same as ours, the heart that longs for freedom, that dares the impossible even at the risk of falling. For those listening in the quiet of night, there is comfort in knowing that such stories endure. They remind us that our struggles are not new, that humanity has always balanced between dream and caution, ambition and humility. The myth of Daedalus and Icarus, ancient though it is, still whispers to us: fly, but fly wisely. Dream, but dream with care. Seek the sky, but remember the sea. And so the legacy of the myth is twofold: a warning against recklessness, and an enduring testament to the beauty of human aspiration. It is tragedy and inspiration woven together, grief and wonder bound in one tale. And in that duality lies its power, the reason we tell it still, the reason it lingers in art, in poetry, in the hush of bedtime stories. After the fall of Icarus, Daedalus' flight carried him far from the grief-soaked waters of the Icarian Sea. The boy was gone, but the father still lived, and survival demanded movement, demanded adaptation, demanded new beginnings. With careful strokes of his wings, Daedalus guided himself toward distant shores, seeking refuge, seeking safety, seeking a place where he could breathe once more, where the memory of his son would not overwhelm every heartbeat. Eventually, he arrived on the island of Sicily, a land of fertile valleys, soaring cliffs, and welcoming kings. Here he was received by King Icarus, who was said to be wise and generous, and who recognized the brilliance of Daedalus. The island became a sanctuary, a place removed from Minos' reach, where the inventor could begin anew. Though sorrow lingered like a shadow, Sicily offered a chance to continue his work, to turn his genius toward creation rather than escape. In Sicily, Daedalus' mind was as active as ever. He designed palaces, fortified walls, ingenious traps, and marvelous machines. The legends speak of him constructing labyrinths once more, though not to trap monsters, but as works of art and as demonstrations of skill. His inventions became famous throughout the island, drawing admiration and awe. It is said that he introduced innovations in water systems, lifting devices, and architectural design, forever changing the landscapes he touched. Yet, even as his hands built wonders, his heart remained heavy. The absence of Icarus weighed upon him constantly. He was a man surrounded by marvels, yet haunted by the one thing no invention could restore. Every creation carried a shadow of the boy who had flown too high, every measured stroke of craftsmanship reminded him of the fragility of ambition, the danger of exceeding limits. His genius was both a blessing and a reminder of loss. The myth tells that Minos, furious at his son's death and still consumed with anger at Daedalus' flight from Crete, pursued the inventor even to Sicily. He sought to capture the man who had humiliated him twice, once by aiding Theseus, and again by escaping Crete in defiance of his orders. But the king's reach could not extend across the sea, and King Cocalus protected Daedalus, offering him sanctuary. The tension between Minos' wrath and Daedalus' survival became another layer in the story, emphasizing how innovation and cleverness could outwit brute force, yet never erase the weight of consequences. In Sicily, Daedalus' work was not limited to walls and labyrinths. Some legends say he created statues so lifelike that they seemed to breathe. Others suggest he crafted automata, mechanical servants, and animals that moved with astonishing precision. Every creation was a testament to human ingenuity, to the power of thought and imagination. Even in exile, Daedalus continued to shape the world, perhaps as a way to channel grief, perhaps to leave a mark that would endure longer than memory alone. But despite these achievements, Daedalus remained a figure of duality, admired for his genius, yet haunted by tragedy. He was celebrated, yet sorrowful, brilliant, yet marked by personal loss. His story in Sicily serves as a reminder that even extraordinary talent cannot shield one from life's harshest realities. Creation and destruction, triumph and grief, always walk hand in hand. It is said that in Sicily, Daedalus also became a teacher, passing his knowledge to those willing to learn. He may have shared techniques of architecture, invention, and craftsmanship, imparting the careful observation and skill that had once created wings for himself and his son. In this way, his legacy extended beyond the man himself, touching future generations, shaping minds, and ensuring that even if tragedy marred his personal life, his genius would endure. The story of Daedalus in Sicily also carries a note of quiet defiance. Though his heart bore grief, though the shadow of Icarus' fall never lifted, he continued to work, to imagine, to create. He had been trapped by kings and by circumstance, yet he refused to be imprisoned by sorrow. In many ways, the myth celebrates this persistence, suggesting that even when loss seems overwhelming, the human mind and spirit can continue to reach, to explore, to transform the world. And still, the shadow of Icarus lingered. Perhaps in the quiet nights of Sicily, Daedalus gazed at the stars, recalling his son's laughter, imagining what might have been had caution prevailed. The memory of the flight, the fall, the sea below, it was a reminder that brilliance and tragedy are often inseparable, that joy and sorrow coexist in the lives of those who dare to reach beyond the ordinary. Legends speak of Daedalus' death quietly, his life eventually ending far from the noise of Minos' palace and the cliffs of Crete. Yet the creations he left behind continued to inspire awe. Palaces, labyrinths, mechanical wonders, they all bore the mark of a mind that had reached beyond what was possible, even in the face of sorrow. And in the mythic imagination, the story of Daedalus and Icarus endured together, the invention and the flight, the loss and the legacy, inseparable in memory. For those who hear the tale, Sicily represents a place of refuge and renewal. It is a reminder that even after profound loss, life can continue, and human ingenuity can still leave a mark upon the world. Daedalus, though marked by grief, did not surrender to despair. Instead, he transformed sorrow into creation, tragedy into legacy, and, in doing so, ensured that the story of him and his son would echo through time. Pause here, and picture the image. Daedalus walking through the streets of a Sicilian city, observing his constructions, perhaps speaking to apprentices, perhaps staring out to sea, lost in memory. The sun sets over the hills, casting long shadows across the stone. Though Icarus is gone, the lessons of the flight remain, carried forward in every design, every careful measurement, every innovation that bends human ingenuity toward beauty and utility. In this way, the myth of Daedalus does not end with loss alone. It extends into creativity, survival, and influence. It reminds us that even in exile, even in sorrow, the human mind can craft wonders, and that legacy is not measured solely by what we keep, but also by what we leave behind. Flight has always captured the human imagination. From the earliest myths to the modern age, the idea of rising above the earth, of leaving behind the weight of stone and soil, speaks to a desire that is at once universal and deeply personal. In the story of Daedalus and Icarus, flight is more than a literal escape. It becomes a symbol, a metaphor for the human spirit, for ambition, and for the fragile beauty of aspiration. Daedalus' wings, constructed of feathers and wax, are themselves a testament to ingenuity, to the power of observation, and to the courage to defy limits. They represent what humans can accomplish when intellect and creativity are combined with determination. Yet these wings also carry a warning: even the most carefully constructed dreams can fail if we overreach, if we ignore wisdom, if we allow pride to outshine prudence. Flight, in this myth, is both liberation and risk, freedom and responsibility. Icarus embodies the intoxicating allure of possibility. He is the part of all of us that dreams without caution, that yearns for the sun, that reaches higher than reason advises. In his ascent, we see the joy of potential realized, the thrill of breaking boundaries, the rapture of experiencing something entirely new. His fall, tragic as it is, does not erase the beauty of the moment when he first lifted into the sky. The myth reminds us that daring to rise is itself a kind of triumph, even if it carries consequences. At the same time, the story honors Daedalus' wisdom and restraint. He is a figure of guidance, of foresight, of measured action. His voice, full of instruction and warning, reflects the knowledge that creation alone is not enough. Understanding the world and respecting its limits is equally vital. He represents the balance of aspiration with care, intelligence with empathy, experience with love. Together, father and son embody two sides of human nature: the daring to dream and the responsibility to guide. In reflecting on the symbolism of flight, one can also see parallels with life itself. Each of us carries ambitions, dreams, and goals, metaphorical wings that allow us to rise above circumstance. Like Icarus, we may be tempted to soar too high, to chase desires without heed, risking burnout, failure, or disappointment. Like Daedalus, we must learn caution, discernment, and patience, understanding that guidance, experience, and preparation are as important as the wings themselves. The air through which Daedalus and Icarus flew can be imagined as the unknown of life. It is unpredictable, shifting, and vast. To navigate it requires both courage and respect, an awareness of the forces beyond our control. The story teaches that while we may not be able to control fate, we can control our actions, our choices, and the preparation we bring to our endeavors. Even failure, when approached thoughtfully, becomes part of learning, part of growth. Moreover, the myth addresses the tension between mortality and aspiration. Humans are bound by the limitations of the body and time, yet the mind yearns for transcendence. Flight is the perfect metaphor for this yearning. It is an attempt to rise above earthly constraints, to touch the infinite, to glimpse what lies beyond the horizon. The story reminds us that striving for greatness is both noble and perilous, that every ambition carries potential for both beauty and loss. In quieter, more reflective terms, flight also symbolizes freedom from confinement, both literal and metaphorical. Daedalus and Icarus were trapped in a tower, imprisoned by Minos' power, yet their ingenuity allowed them to break free, to claim the open air. In our own lives, we may encounter walls, obstacles, fears, doubts, that keep us bound. The myth encourages us to find our own wings, to invent solutions, to use creativity and intellect to overcome the prisons that surround us. Yet it also reminds us to proceed carefully, respecting the fragility of the tools we create and the forces we face. The story's enduring resonance also lies in its emotional depth. Joy and wonder, hope and grief, triumph and tragedy, all coexist in the narrative. Flight is exhilarating, but it is not free from consequence. The duality of the myth mirrors life itself. The very actions that bring liberation may also carry unforeseen risks. The heights we reach may be accompanied by vulnerability, the moments of beauty may be fleeting. In this way, the myth becomes a meditation, a reflective tale that encourages calm contemplation and emotional awareness. For those who listen to such stories at night, as in a bedtime or relaxation context, the symbolism of flight takes on a gentle, immersive quality. One can imagine the air, the warmth of sunlight, the pull of the sea below, and the freedom of motion, all while reflecting on the deeper truths hidden beneath the narrative. The myth encourages mindfulness, to soar in imagination, to respect limits, to treasure fleeting moments of beauty, to balance ambition with care. Ultimately, Daedalus and Icarus stand as archetypes: the inventor, the dreamer, the guide, and the risk-taker. Their story is both cautionary and inspiring. It reminds us that creation, curiosity, and aspiration are vital parts of human life, but that wisdom, preparation, and respect for limits are equally necessary. Flight, then, becomes a mirror of the human condition, a pursuit of freedom and meaning, filled with both exhilaration and vulnerability, a journey into unknown realms that calls for courage, insight, and heart. And so, as we imagine the sky through which they flew, the sun above, the sea below, and the fragile wings carrying both hope and risk, we come to understand the profound symbolism woven into the myth. It is not just a story of ancient Greece, it is a story for all times, for all listeners, for all dreamers who look upward and imagine themselves rising, even as they tread carefully between aspiration and caution. Even thousands of years after it was first told, the story of Daedalus and Icarus continues to resonate. It is not simply a tale of myth, but a mirror reflecting the challenges, desires, and triumphs that exist within each of us. Though the setting is ancient, Crete, towering prisons, wings of wax and feathers, the lessons it conveys remain timeless, bridging the gap between the world of gods and mortals and the modern lives we live today. One of the clearest lessons is the importance of balance. Icarus' fatal flaw was his inability to temper ambition with caution. In our own lives, we too can be tempted to fly too close to the sun, whether through unchecked desires, reckless pursuits, or impatience in achieving goals. The myth reminds us to pause, reflect, and consider not only what we seek but how we approach it. Moderation, awareness, and preparation are not limitations, they are tools that allow us to soar more safely and sustain our progress over time. At the same time, the story celebrates aspiration. Flight itself is exhilarating, and the act of rising above constraints is a reminder that striving for something greater is a fundamental part of the human experience. We are, in essence, Icarus when we dream of doing more, being more, or discovering new possibilities. The key is not to eliminate ambition, but to pair it with wisdom, to honor both the thrill of reaching and the need for prudence. In this way, the myth encourages us to embrace our desires thoughtfully, to pursue goals with intention and awareness. Another lesson lies in the nature of guidance and mentorship. Daedalus represents the voice of wisdom, the careful hand guiding someone through unfamiliar territory. In the modern world, we too are both teachers and learners. We receive guidance from those who have gone before us, and we pass it on to those who will follow. The tragedy of Icarus reminds us that instructions, advice, and experience are precious, and yet, they are only effective if combined with listening, understanding, and patience. The story encourages respect for counsel and mindfulness in heeding it. The myth also speaks to resilience and survival. Daedalus, despite his grief and sorrow, continued to live, to create, and to shape the world around him. Life, like flight, can carry unexpected losses. Goals may falter, relationships may fracture, and dreams may collapse in ways we cannot foresee. Yet Daedalus' journey to Sicily shows us that survival is not merely physical, it is the persistence of the mind, the determination to continue learning and creating even after profound setbacks. In our own lives, resilience is the quiet, enduring act of carrying forward, even when grief or failure weighs heavily upon us. Moreover, the myth invites contemplation of mortality and impermanence. Icarus' flight was brief, fragile, and fleeting, yet it shone brightly in that short span. In the same way, moments of achievement, joy, and beauty in our lives are often transient. Recognizing the impermanence of these experiences encourages us to treasure them more fully, to savor small victories, fleeting joys, and the exhilaration of exploration while remaining mindful of their fragility. It teaches a kind of mindful appreciation, a gentle lesson suitable for reflection, particularly at the quiet close of a day. The story also reminds us of human creativity and ingenuity. Daedalus' wings were a testament to careful observation, experimentation, and skill. He turned adversity into invention, transforming the constraints of a prison into a path to freedom. In our modern context, we are called to exercise creativity in navigating challenges, finding solutions where obstacles seem insurmountable. Whether through work, art, learning, or problem-solving, the human mind has an enduring capacity to innovate and overcome. Daedalus is an archetype of this enduring ingenuity. Furthermore, the myth encourages emotional awareness and empathy. Daedalus' grief over Icarus' fall is profound and deeply human. It teaches us to honor our emotions, to recognize the weight of loss, and to carry memory with both sorrow and love. While ambition and success are celebrated, so too must the human heart be acknowledged, the vulnerability, the care, and the deep bonds that shape our lives. In this way, the story balances intellect with emotion, achievement with compassion. For those listening in a calm, reflective setting, perhaps before sleep, the tale offers a form of meditation. We can imagine the gentle rise and fall of wings, the stretching sky, the shimmering sea below, and the quiet lessons embedded in each movement. It encourages the mind to wander, to contemplate, and to internalize wisdom while remaining relaxed. The story becomes a tool for reflection, a guide to personal growth, and a soothing narrative for the imagination. Finally, the myth reminds us that both triumph and tragedy are inseparable in the human journey. The exhilaration of flight cannot exist without risk, the joy of achievement cannot exist without the shadow of loss. By embracing both aspects, we learn to navigate life with humility, gratitude, and courage. We learn to fly, metaphorically, while respecting the forces around us, and to cherish moments of freedom while remaining mindful of their fragility. In essence, the myth of Daedalus and Icarus is a story for all listeners, not just children or lovers of history, but anyone seeking to reflect on life, ambition, creativity, and emotion. It is a gentle, immersive narrative that blends calm storytelling with profound insight. It reminds us to dream boldly, act wisely, cherish the fleeting moments of beauty, and carry forward even in the face of loss. As we reflect on this ancient tale, it becomes clear why it endures. It is not only a story of flight, invention, or tragedy, it is a story of what it means to be human. It teaches, comforts, warns, and inspires all at once. And in the quiet hours, when the mind is calm and the imagination is free to wander, we can carry its lessons softly, like feathers floating on the air, lifting our thoughts toward both caution and aspiration. As our story draws to a close, we return to the sky and the sea, to the wind and the light, and to the quiet spaces where imagination lingers. The tale of Daedalus and Icarus, though ancient, is alive in the moments between thought and reflection, in the gentle rise and fall of our breath, and in the way we carry its lessons forward into our own lives. It is a story of wings and flight, of risk and consequence, of creation and loss, and, above all, of the human heart reaching toward both the impossible and the necessary. We leave behind the high cliffs of Crete, where stone walls once imprisoned a brilliant mind and a restless boy. We leave behind the scattered feathers and the vast Icarian sea, where the youthful energy of Icarus met the unforgiving forces of the world. We even leave behind the sun, which burned so brightly that it claimed the fragile wax of ambition. And yet, though these places remain fixed in the story, the lessons they carry are fluid, shifting gently into our own experiences, inviting contemplation and calm reflection. Daedalus remains, in the story, a figure of quiet endurance. Though grief touched him deeply, he survived, he created, and he continued to navigate the world with care and thought. In this, we find a lesson of resilience. Life may bring loss, mistakes, and heartbreak, yet the human spirit has the capacity to carry on, to adapt, to create, and to find meaning even when the skies have turned gray with sorrow. His persistence reminds us that while joy may be fleeting and triumph fragile, the act of living, of moving forward, is in itself a form of quiet courage. Icarus, too, leaves an indelible impression, his story a reminder of the exhilaration of daring and dreaming. His ascent was swift, his joy unbounded, and his fall tragic. And yet, in that brief flight, he embodied the beauty of aspiration, the willingness to leave the familiar, to explore new heights, and to feel the wind as it lifts us toward the unknown. Even in failure, even in loss, there is something radiant in the act of reaching, something timeless in the courage to rise. In his story, we see ourselves, the dreamers, the risk-takers, the hearts eager to soar, always balancing excitement with caution. As we reflect on the wings themselves, the meticulous craft of Daedalus, the fragile balance of feathers and wax, we are reminded of the delicate interplay between effort and outcome. Human creation, human endeavor, and even human imagination are like these wings, beautiful, powerful, yet inherently fragile. Success is rarely absolute, and loss is rarely total, but through attention, care, and wisdom, we can guide our ambitions, shape our dreams, and navigate the air of life with more skill and mindfulness. There is also a quiet meditation here on time and memory. The moments of flight, however brief, they exist forever in story and imagination. Icarus' laughter, the father's warnings, the rush of wind, the sun's heat, the shimmer of the sea, these moments are preserved across centuries, carried gently in memory and myth. They teach us that even fleeting experiences can leave lasting impressions, that joy, grief, and wonder are not bound by time, and that stories, like wings, allow us to rise beyond the limits of our own lives. The story's final lesson is perhaps the most subtle and profound: balance. In every movement of wings, in every beat of the heart, in every flight into the unknown, there is the delicate tension between freedom and restraint, between desire and wisdom, between ambition and consequence. Daedalus' caution and Icarus' eagerness remind us that both qualities are essential to the human experience. Too much caution may prevent us from soaring, while too much recklessness may lead to fall. It is in navigating this middle path, this balance, that we find the fullness of life. And so, as you imagine the sky now, wide and serene, imagine the gentle rise and fall of wings, the soft whisper of the wind, and the calm expanse of the sea below. Imagine Daedalus' careful movements, Icarus' fleeting laughter, and the quiet reflection that follows loss and joy alike. In this visualization, there is both peace and wisdom, a recognition that life is both fragile and beautiful, both finite and enduring, both a journey and a meditation. As the day closes in this imagined world, let the story settle gently, like feathers drifting down through the air, like sunlight fading softly into the horizon. There is no need to rush, no need to resolve, no need to hurry to the end. The myth is timeless, and its lessons are ours to carry, quietly and steadily, as we rest, reflect, and prepare to meet our own days with both courage and mindfulness. Even in quiet contemplation, there is a sense of continuity: the wings, the flight, the sky, the sea, and the human heart that dares to dream. In telling and retelling this story, we honor those elements, preserving the memory of those who dared to soar and those who guided them. We remember both the thrill of ambition and the quiet responsibility of care, the beauty of creation and the inevitability of consequence. And in that remembrance, we find a calm, steady rhythm, a soothing cadence for thought and reflection. So, as you let your mind linger in this space, know that the story of Daedalus and Icarus is more than a myth. It is a meditation, a gentle narrative for reflection, a tale that encourages aspiration tempered with wisdom, joy balanced with caution, and memory carried with love. It invites us to imagine, to dream, to reflect, and ultimately, to rest, carrying its lessons quietly into the hours of sleep, into the stillness of night, and into the calm of the mind. Let the last image linger: the sky, wide and infinite, the wind, carrying whispers of wings, the sun, warm but distant, and the sea, calm and eternal. Daedalus continues onward, Icarus lives in memory, and we, the listeners, take with us the gentle echoes of flight, freedom, and reflection. In this quiet conclusion, the myth rests, and we may rest with it, mindful, peaceful, and ready to dream. And so, the story of Daedalus and Icarus reaches its quiet conclusion, though its echoes continue to linger in the imagination, like a soft breeze through the trees or the gentle ripple of waves along a distant shore. In these last moments, we are invited not only to remember the tale itself, the daring flight, the fragile wings, the warmth of the sun, the deep blue of the sea, but also to reflect on the lessons it carries, carried gently into our own lives. Icarus, though lost to the sea, remains alive in memory, a symbol of the joy and wonder of reaching for the impossible. His flight reminds us that moments of exhilaration, though fleeting, are precious, and that the courage to dream, to explore, and to embrace possibility is a gift to ourselves and the world. Even in loss, there is beauty, a reminder that the human spirit can aspire, soar, and leave its mark upon the sky, however briefly. Daedalus endures as a figure of wisdom, resilience, and creativity. His inventions, his guidance, and his perseverance reflect the balance of intellect and care, skill and compassion. Through his story, we see that survival after tragedy, the continuation of creation, and the quiet bearing of grief are themselves forms of strength. Even when sorrow touches our hearts, there is a path forward, a way to honor memory while continuing to move through the world with intention and purpose. And now, as the tale settles into stillness, imagine the wide, open sky above, the calm sea below, and the gentle whisper of wind carrying the memory of wings. Feel the quiet rhythm of reflection, the soft cadence of thought, the sense of peace that comes with understanding both the wonder and the fragility of life. In this moment, the story has done its work. It has carried us above the ordinary, allowed us to explore imagination and insight, and now invites us to rest, breathe, and linger in calm awareness. The myth of Daedalus and Icarus ends here not in silence alone, but in a gentle invitation to dream, to reflect, and to carry forward the lessons of courage, caution, love, and balance into our own lives. And as we do, we leave the story with the sky, the sun, the sea, and the wings of imagination, resting peacefully until the next time we choose to fly once more in thought, memory, or dream.